morning. Just want to get a sense from your face or facial expressions as to whether 100-year life sounds great or awful. Depends. Okay, so a bit pensive. So when I speak to, so I work with these companies here to help them understand what the future of work will look like and how they need to prepare. And whenever I speak to finance companies about the 100-year life, it is the toughest crowd. They are pretty pessimistic. It's not looking good as far as they're concerned. But my job today is to help us think about how we can live our own 100-year lives, and I'll explain a bit more about that in a second, in a productive, happy, and fulfilling way, and how we can help our children and the next generation have the tools they need to live their own 100-year lives in a happy, fulfilling, and productive way. So I'm a researcher by trade, and I couldn't possibly start without getting some data from you guys. So I'm going to ask you all to stand up just for a second. So we know how old the oldest person in the UK is, but now we need to know who knows the oldest person out of all the people here. Not the oldest person in the room here, that's awkward. The oldest person that any one of you know outside of the room, probably. So could you stay standing if you know someone over the age of 80? 85? 90? 95? I feel the increments have to change. 97? 99? Anyone over 100? Okay, so 5 left. Can you just shout out who you know and how old they are?
My nan is 100.
100, fantastic. Brilliant. Have you filled in the paperwork to get her the letter? Because it won't just come by itself. Just checking. Okay, thank you. And you, sir?
My mum's neighbour is 101 and she has got the letter.
Fantastic, 101. And you, sir?
My nan and my granddad are 101.
Amazing genes. You're living forever. Okay, so just quick shout-outs.
My best friend's run is 101.
101, so we seem to be peaking around the 101, 102. You, sir?
My grandma's 101.
101. Any advance on 101? 102? 102. And then we've got 2 more people to try and beat 102.
My neighbour's
102.
102. My granny's 105.
105. We have a winner. Thank you very much. You can take a seat. So I always like to think I'll win this one, because this is my Nana, Mavis Jackson. In 5 weeks' time, she will turn 100. Aww. And look how happy she is. So Mavis was born around 100 years ago, unsurprisingly, born in Rangoon, Burma. When she was born, life expectancy was around 45 years old. So she's outperformed her life expectancy by a factor of around 2.1. If I do the same, I'll live to be 183. But it's not looking likely. That's not the data that we're seeing. But when we were researching this trend, when we were researching what it means to live far longer than our parents and our grandparents, one of the first messages that we stumbled upon and that we talked to big employers about is that actually we won't have many role models as to how we do live a happy, fulfilling, and productive 100-year life. There aren't many people out there who can say to us, this is how you do it. So I thought to myself, well, I'm in a fantastic position because I do have a role model. I can just go and ask Nana, how did you do it? I'll do the same. So I said to her, Nana, I'm researching demographic trends, the 100-year life, it's all about you. What's your advice to me about how I can live a happy, fulfilling life and smile, as big a smile as you do on your 100th birthday? And being Asian and Catholic, she said to me, Ma, have plenty of children. 14 to be precise, because if you have 14 children, you get a return on investment of around 74 grandchildren. You get the best support network you could ever imagine. We have a rota, we have a family planning committee. It's not to put it quite what it sounds. We have schedules. I'm Monday nights, my cousin is Thursday evenings. She is one well-looked after woman, and she was really thinking ahead, and she makes no doubt about the fact that this was the plan. So maybe we might have to look a bit back into different communities when we think about how we'll live our 100-year life. That's her. So why are we talking about 100 years specifically? Well, we're seeing data about the amazing accomplishment of humanity, and it really is that we have added so many more years to life expectancy in the last 100 years than pretty much all the previous years of humanity combined. And it's now a reality for around half of babies born in 2007 to live into their hundreds. And we look at Japan, we see 107. In fact, South Korea has just pipped the post for Japan there and actually lived to around 109 for this data. Japan, by the way, is really interesting to look at when you're looking at the future of work. When looking at technology, demography, they're really some of the front runners of the trends that we're seeing. So people living for longer, technology impacting work, and so on. So a really interesting country to observe. So those are babies born in 2007, but what about you guys? What about the generations in the room today? Well, for every generation, we can expect to far outlive our parents and our grandparents. And this is the average age at which 50% of that cohort will live to those points. So I'll just let you locate yourself on the ladder. It's very exciting, isn't it? You're starting to feel a bit more positive. Mavis looked happy. We think we can do this. But what is the implication of the 100-year life? What will this mean for ourselves? What does it already mean? I think we're all experiencing it already. And what does it mean in terms of the futures of the young people that you're educating today? Well, the most important phenomenon that we're seeing is the breakup of the three-stage life. So when we look back, perhaps a generation, 2 generations, up to about 3 or 4 generations ago, life followed 3 discrete stages. We all got educated to around 18, 20, moved into work, all again in one big cohort, and then perhaps in the late 50s, early 60s, moved into retirement. 3 nice discrete stages. But what we know is that every additional year of life expectancy that we have gained, we have added to that third phase, that third stage, to retirement. So much so that if we retire at 60 and expect to live to around our late 90s, perhaps even into our hundreds, we now have a 1-to-1 ratio of retired life to working life. And that just doesn't work. It doesn't work in terms of our finances, hence the sad faces of the finance people in the rooms I speak to. But it also doesn't work in terms of any of the other elements that we require to live a healthy life. Just to dispel one myth, people tend to think retiring is universally, unequivocally good for your health. It's not. If you're working, and this is the big caveat, if you're working in good, fulfilling work that isn't dangerous, that contributes to your sense of identity, so many of you in the room here, I imagine, and ideally the people that you'll be educating today, then stopping working does not necessarily lead to better health outcomes. We have a lot tied up with our work, our identity, our social networks, our physical activity often. So we're now having to question what we do with this retirement phase, because we can't financially afford for that 3-stage life to just continue if we keep stretching out retirement. Likewise, we can't just keep stretching out work and make that retirement a bit smaller, because working for 55, 60 years rather than 35 to 40 years just isn't feasible in the cultures that we have in our organizations. And also, what do we do with that education point, that front-loaded education point? Well, I think the key message for you in the room and for the people you're educating is that these won't be 3 stages. They'll be threads that we weave throughout our lives. If we look at how, as we've heard already today, the jobs that people will be doing in 10, 20 years' time probably don't exist as yet. The skills they'll need are constantly being changed by what technology brings to the workplace, and then what is left as those uniquely human skills that people will bring. So we're going to need to re-educate ourselves, take on significant chunks of learning well into our adult lives and continuously, rather than relying on this front-loaded education piece. So that changes the whole proposition of education from being how it prepares us for work and life to how it supports us continually. It changes the whole perception of, certainly when I hear it from my younger cousins, of, once we finish A-levels, we'll be done, and then we'll finish university, and that'll be the end of learning. We'll get to just do stuff. No. It's going to be much more about learning to learn. And how do we make this a woven part of every part of our life. So how is learning incorporated into our work more, into our interests? And the same with that retirement piece. It begs the question, why do we wait until the very third stage of our lives for all this rest and recuperation that actually we could really do with a lot earlier on? And this, I think, is the biggest promise of the 100-year life and of rethinking these 3 stages, is that it can make life a little bit easier for all of us at those points when we could just do with a bit of a break. In particular, when you look at self-reported well-being, it tracks up from your early teens into your early 20s in a nice steep incline. Everyone gets happier and happier and reports high levels of well-being and happiness into their mid-20s or so. And then something happens in your 30s and 40s that makes it go down. What is it? Kids, work, marriage. I'm not going to put... That's the first marriage I've ever got. I'm not going to even identify who was in the room in case it's being recorded. So lots of different things can make life a bit tough when you're in your in your 30s, 40s, into your 50s. And it's because we have to do everything at once. So we have to be in the sprints in our careers, push for the promotions, push ourselves to be developing in our work lives, at the same time that we're trying to get a mortgage, have a family, these days, look after older relatives as well. So what if we were to change that dynamic and say, actually, rather than waiting until the very end of our life for all of our leisure, we weave that leisure throughout. And this is a really interesting and difficult conversation that I have with companies very regularly at the moment, is how do you give people time to take a break at the midpoints of their careers? How do you give them the option to do that without penalizing them by saying, yeah, you can take a break, but that's your choice. We can't guarantee what you're going to come back to. And no one else who's in our leadership team has done that. There's lots of negative sanctions for people who take time out at various points in the mid-stage of career and life. So how do we reinvent this model to be those 3 threads that we weave throughout our lives? And how do we communicate that really clearly to young people as we prepare them for life? Well, this is just an example of how MBA students from London Business School anticipated what their life might look like. So it's just a combination of different ideas. We pulled together this infographic to show some of the different options they chose. So MBA graduates, they're around 26 to 32 in age. And they said, okay, well, when we look at how we started out our life when we were 21, we were thinking grad scheme, maybe not. Some of them didn't take a grad scheme. They started their own businesses. Again, something you couldn't have done a generation or 2 ago. Starting your own business would have required a property, an office space, lots of expensive equipment. How would you build a network? Whereas now we know that LinkedIn helps us with that. WeWork will give us some space. So many more options. And the point isn't so much what they've said they'll do at each point in their life, but all the question marks. And certainly the employers that I work with are finding this the biggest challenge, that people aren't predictable anymore. In a 3-stage life, you could pretty much say when someone's 21, they're looking for a graduate scheme, some sort of entrance into the workforce, probably in an established organization. Not really the case anymore. When they're in their 30s, they're going to want good, stable jobs because they are certainly going to be starting their family and taking on big financial commitments. Not necessarily the case. And for sure, when they're in their 60s, they'll be winding down, right? No. So for organizations, for employers, this is becoming a big challenge. How do we understand what people will want, and how do we create the space for them to live the life they want to live and be engaged in our organization? I think the parallel challenge for individuals is navigating this. On the one hand, more choices, more options gives us that possibility of alleviating some of the difficult points in life, some of those big stressful points, and taking choices that match what we want rather than what society has dictated. But at the same time, it puts a lot of pressure on individuals to be very confident in their choices. So when everyone's doing roughly the same thing that you're doing, if everyone's retiring at 60, if everyone's moving into work at 21, if everyone's getting married at 30, 31, 32, then to validate your own decisions, you look at the person next to you of a similar age, they're doing the same, you're fine. The challenge for a lot of young people today, and actually for many of us in this room, is that we are taking different paths that mean we are out of sync with our peers. It means we have to be much more secure about the choices we're making and ensure that they will help us lead that happy, productive, and fulfilling life. So how do we prepare people for this 100-year life? How do we prepare young people, particularly, for the world they're going into? My proposition is that we need to think about intangible assets. And by intangible assets, I mean productivity, the skills we need in order to thrive, be employable, our vitality, so our physical, social, and mental health, and our ability to transform, what it takes to successfully transition through different periods of our lives. And I think we need to apply the same rigor to our intangible assets as we do to our tangible assets. So our tangible assets are things like our finances, our savings, our pensions, perhaps. And at any given point in time, I pretty much know whether my savings are being built, maintained, or depleted. It's right there in front of me, whether I like it or not. But do I know the same about my intangible assets? Do I know the same about the things that will keep me employable, keep me healthy, and keep me happy? And I think this has been the big challenge in this area, particularly in corporations, that when you talk about well-being, it's kind of up here somewhere. It's difficult to put a number to, and we like numbers. It's difficult to ground. Whereas when we put it into a framework like this, we can start thinking, actually, I can now see how these intangible assets are subject to the same forces as my tangible assets. So you think about these three areas. I'll give you just a second to think where you might be on this spectrum. So, for example, for productivity, where might you be in terms of feeling like you might become obsolete? Have you not learned very much lately, or are you continually learning, therefore feeling you might be current? Burnout versus energetic, and static versus I'm feeling like I could adapt. I'm ready to face change. So let's look at each one of those in turn. So when it comes to productivity, the key point for us in the room and for the young people you're educating is how do we anticipate, first of all, what future skills will be required, and then how do we respond? So are we having those conversations with young people today to say, this is how we understand what future skills will be required, what we'll need? This is how technology is disrupting work. There's some great data out there. The World Economic Forum produces fantastic reports on this subject, but showing exactly how is technology impacting the skills that we need? What are those uniquely human skills like creativity, empathy? How do you build those? And Tom's going to give a fantastic talk in a second about how you codify some of those elements. So when it comes to productivity, are we helping people understand how to have foresight about what will be the skills they'll need in the years ahead? Not necessarily the jobs, because jobs are kind of a difficult unit of analysis. Job titles don't change very much. An associate has been a position in a law firm for decades. What an associate does is very different now to previous years. So how are we anticipating future skills, and are we communicating that to the people that we're educating? Then when we look at vitality, we ran a really interesting project with PwC 5 years ago, the auditing and accounting firm, with their millennials, so they're people who'd been in the company for perhaps 2 years. And what they were noticing is that their millennials were turning over far faster than they'd hoped. They were leaving in higher numbers. And they said to us, we think they're being managed wrong. You know, they're different cohort millennials. We need to do something different to this group. So how do we manage them differently? And we ran a crowdsourcing conversation with their millennial cohort around the world to say, okay, so talk to us about how you want to be managed. But we also gave them the opportunity to ask their own questions in this crowdsourcing online conversation about whatever was important to them. And the two big conversations that came up were, first of all, about global mobility. They wanted different experiences around the world. They joined a global company, didn't feel they were getting a global experience. And the second one was, we don't have enough time to maintain our well-being. Loud and clear as a reason for leaving. We don't have time to spend time with our friends. We don't have time to go to the gym. We don't have time to preserve our well-being. So we are hearing this much, much more in younger generations of the workforce. I think it's not really the younger generations of the workforce feel it, want it, need it more than anybody else in the workforce, but they're being asked more often because they arrived at the same period as SurveyMonkey. that's the only reason why millennials are seen to be different, because you keep asking them. If you ask people in their 30s, 40s, and 50s, they also like well-being. It's crazy. But the big trigger for change in a lot of organizations is that millennials have quite a loud voice and are, of course, seen as if, well, they were seen as a future talent. They're now in their early 30s. They're getting a lot less interesting. But employers are starting to wake up to this for exactly that reason, that people are making choices based not only on the traditional metrics of employment, how much money will I earn, what kind of status will I have, where will I get to travel, who will I get to meet, but also what will my life look like. And if I think about when I was figuring out what career I should do, I think the one thing that I wish I'd thought about more and earlier on was what will my life look like if I take this job, or work in this industry. And I think that is becoming much more on the agenda of, well, certainly young people and therefore employers. The other element there was around building relationships. So they talked about the unpredictability of working hours being the biggest issue for them. Not long working hours. A lot of them joined professional services firms, and this is not just necessarily just PwC, but other organizations in similar industries. They joined big companies knowing they'd work long hours. That was okay, part of the deal. But the unpredictability was really difficult. Because if you cancel on a football match at the last minute one Wednesday, your friends are a bit annoyed. By the second Wednesday, they're pretty pissed off. By the fifth Wednesday, you don't have any friends left. And when you're trying to navigate a really complex, open career like we saw from the MBA sketch there, you need your friends around you. If you're moving careers more often, if you're moving jobs more often, perhaps, you need the support of those peers. And we are hearing that from younger generations in the workforce. And finally, transformational. So this is the really new one. In a three-stage life, we had two big transformations, into the workforce and out of the workforce. Now we transform much more often. And some of those transformations we choose, and some of them are bestowed upon us. And we have to be equally prepared for both. But what is it that helps people transform? The first is having a diverse network. It's really difficult to imagine yourself in a different possible future role if everyone around you is very similar to you. Likewise, people around you who are similar to you, so our close friends and family, are unlikely to encourage us to move roles into a significantly different path because they like us as we are. And we like our friends to be as they are. You very rarely hear someone say, he's changed, as a good thing. We like people to stay the same because it reminds us that we're all okay, we don't have to change, everything's as it is. So having a diverse network is a really important factor for all of us here and for young people in terms of imagining possible future selves who are different and therefore feeling more confident that they can move into those roles. They probably have the most diverse network they are ever going to have at this stage in primary, secondary, and secondary school, perhaps even going into university. And the challenge is to stop that from narrowing and narrowing as it tends to do throughout our working lives. And the other point is diverse experiences. Can we ensure that we are putting ourselves into different worlds, into different paths, where we learn a bit more about ourselves? We get quite comfortable quite quickly in terms of what our skills are, what our identity is. But we learn so much more about ourselves by putting ourselves into very different environments. They don't have to be extreme, but just with different people in different worlds. So as we think about the 100-year life for yourself and for your students, to make this a gift, to relish it as a gift, because I do find it shocking as humanity that we can be worried or, well, not even worried or concerned, but just depressed at the idea of living longer, the best ever gift we could have. But to make that a gift, my offering to you today is to think about your productivity. Think about your vitality. Think about your ability to transform. Know where you are on this spectrum and make sure you're rebalancing every now and again so that you don't overly deplete one of those three. And then share this message with your students. Thank you.
Yeah. Fantastic, Emma. That's brilliant. I was looking at the interaction online and the fear around growing old is a bit scary for many. Are there any questions from anyone in the audience for Emma and the 100 Life with regards to your schools, businesses? Are you all confident? Oh, we have a question. We're going to be running around with microphones at either end of the room. I think we've got the green microphone over here.
Hi, I've been teaching for 20 years, and I've got 4 children now.
You look good.
Yeah, thank you very much. My wife looks better. After 20 years of working crazy hours, and I've got friends in financial services and consultants and all kinds of things, but in terms of the hours I've been doing more hours than all of them my whole working career. And so I've decided this year to work, and many teachers doing this actually reduce from 5 days down to 4 days. I work entirely for free, fully on that day of unpaid work, to try and not be frustrated with my children at the weekends, and if they get ill, that's a disaster because you can't do the work. And you know, that is what a lot of people are experiencing in teaching. It's hemorrhaging staff, really high quality staff, and that's true of other sectors as well. So what about this move towards, if we are going to be working with high productivity for a long time, what about this suggestion about moving towards, you know, this idea of a 4-day working week? A lot of companies are now experimenting with that and actually discovering that productivity is significantly increasing. Is that something you've looked at as a researcher yourself?
Yeah, so I think the 4-day working week has been a very interesting concept for many years now, and the companies that have experimented with it tended to be small to medium-sized companies, and the results tended to be good around productivity. We haven't seen any big experiments in the massive employers so far. I think we're quite far off of that yet, but the conversations we're having with them are the different types of break that people need. So from sabbaticals of several months to just, we call it Saturdays, because for some people having a Saturday off is something they're aiming for, to slithers. So can you take micro breaks throughout the day? Is it okay to be away for a couple of hours? I mean, this is the level at which a lot of organizations are still struggling because of that fear of, well, if someone's not sat there at their desk, they're not working, my incentive structure is around chargeability, how many hours I literally can charge my client rather than the output I'm doing. So, yeah, I think this is still a really tough one, to be honest, for most organizations. But as individuals themselves, and particularly as high performers, are saying, actually, I'm burning out, or I'm going to move to a different organization because they offer me a better quality of life, that's what really prompts that change in organizations.
Fantastic. I've got time for one more question, but there was a lot of hands thrown up, but that's why we've got a lovely app. You see what I did there? Woover, if you download it, put your questions in, or even if you want to be more dynamic, get your stuff on the Twitter wall by using the hashtag FutureTalentLive or following us at Future Talent Now. We can follow up with additional questions. And this young man at the end had a question. If the green mic can flow along. Oh, I like it, blue mic this time. Jasmine's not messing around.
Thanks. I'm a governor of a high school. We have a significant number of disadvantaged children, which has its own problems, really. The surveys you talk about all seem to be skewed to advantaged children. Do you do much about disadvantaged children? Because it seems that they will have different aspirations and different views.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, most of my work is with the corporations on that earlier slide there, so the massive employers, and it tends to be in knowledge work, so in those kind of, office-based environments. I think the observations we have seen at the moment is around social mobility moving up the priority list from diversity and inclusion in those organizations. I'd say it's really tinkering around the edges at the moment in terms of getting people from different backgrounds into those areas of work. But I do work with a charity, and actually our founder is at the back over there, Paul, around helping young people build exactly these skills to succeed regardless of their starting point in life. And we've worked with some amazing people who have had just the toughest start in life to understand exactly what it is that can help those people move into those productive, happy, longer lives. But yes, I completely agree. It's a very different challenge, and I think the response will have to be government and employers together.
Fantastic. Please, big round of applause for Emma.
Thank you. Thanks very much.